director of AERO, and I'm here as a facilitator this morning. We're going to be talking today with Zach, Susan, Brooke, and Becca about marketing the message. So buying local, the term buying local, is that working? And really what we have some interesting perspectives to offer today from these folks. If you've been in Montana for any amount of time, you know that we've had a number of different campaigns around buy local. We've had some statewide initiatives. We've had more locally represented campaigns, if you will, to try to get people interested and excited and invested in the concept of local food systems and wanting to support that system or that vision of transforming agriculture with their dollar. And so the question is, all of that takes a lot of investment of time and energy and money, and a lot of times that right now, the system requires that time investment and energy comes a lot from producers. We're asking of that of our producers. So our producers are not only spending hours and hours in the field, they're figuring out what to plant, when to plant, where to harvest, when to harvest, and where to bring their harvest to, but they're also trying to figure out how do they sell their message of sustainability to their community so that the community invests back in them. And one of the things that we hear at AERO a lot is that that's a heavy burden to ask of folks. And marketing, particularly this day and age, is a pretty tricky thing to hold on to in terms of having technical expertise. How do I know how to brand my produce? How do I know who I'm speaking to? Is this particular sticker working? What words work? What compels people to say, yes, I want to invest in this food system? And what we're realizing is that a lot of farmers and ranchers feel, again, unsupported and siloed, that they have to try to do all aspects of their own production, their own marketing on their own. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about that and like what are some of the things we've learned along the way, what are some successes, and what are some challenges, what can we continue to work on. So I am going to let our speakers introduce themselves and speak a little bit about what aspect of the food system they're coming from, what lens, what they think we are doing well and what we can improve upon. And then at the end, we're going to take questions from all of you, and I have some questions here that we can address as well. So I'm going to let the folks who know better than me start to speak. Do we want to start with you, Becca? Sure, we can work down. Okay, that's great. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Becca Kurnick. I am the Sustainability Director at Montana Ale Works, a restaurant on East Main Street here in Bozeman. It's a new position for the restaurant. I've sort of grown into it over my experience working in restaurants growing up as a kid, farming, ranching, food distribution, studying soils and agricultural education here at MSU. So from that perspective, my decade and a half of working with producers of in various capacities, I've sort of come to learn and observe that conversations around agriculture and food production can be heavy because there's a lot to talk about, and it's just a big topic. There's a lot of heritage and identity that's wrapped up in that in Montana and in general. So my unique position at the restaurant is really cool because restaurants are a unique setting because people have already made the decision to spend money on food. So that first hurdle is crossed. You're already in a conversation about food when people are dining and they want to know what you have. They're making decisions about their dining experience. So that's sort of my role at Ale Works is teaching our staff and finding opportunities to share information with our staff about the layers of agriculture that go into the food and the beer and the spirits that we serve, because there are so many amazing Montana products that go layers of agriculture and generations of production. deep. So I'm also kind of here in a dual role. I work with Open and Local Coalition here in Bozeman, and so we have a annual celebration. This summer was the fourth one of those, where we kind of collect people in the food system in the Gallatin Valley and surrounding communities to kind of talk about these bigger concepts around food. This year we asked all of the participants to complete a survey about their food choices. Why do they why do they choose to purchase local food? What do they foresee as potential aids in spreading the local message or helping other people see the importance of serving local food? So I kind of want to present just a couple of the little findings about that. But before we go into that, I think it's important to acknowledge what we heard this morning and some of the things that Zach mentioned in his talk last night, which I've also observed, is that we need to be open to understanding other people's language. There are so many generations of views that shape the world, how each individual views the world today as an individual.
Sorry.
That's good. So we really need to be open to understanding each other's language before we can really speak it. And before we say thank you, we actually need to start by being curious about each other's stories, the producers who are working land and kind of where they come from. Going into, I'm going to take a few minutes to kind of describe the background I have in sort of decision-making science before I reveal some of the things we found out about this Open and Local survey. When people make decisions based on the theory of planned behavior, we sort of have these attitudes already shaped about what this behavior is, whether it's purchasing local, using a certain agricultural practice, whatever that is. And then, so there's our attitudes about what we think that is, and there are our peer groups that tell us what the social norm is. And then there's the control that we think we have over deciding to do that behavior, purchasing local, using cover crops, no-till instead of, or fallowing, any of those behaviors. And that just those are just things that shape our intention to choose that behavior. And then there's the actual factors that allow us to do that behavior. So there's surrounding factors, whether it's financial, land, capacity, social structures that allow us to do certain things. There are so many things that go into being able to buy local. And so knowing that, I think it's important for us to be able to, like I said, speak in different worldviews, using other people's language to connect the groups that share values, but maybe not vocabulary or experience. So real quickly, we asked Gallatin Valley kind of stakeholders about if they've changed their buying patterns to purchase more local food. The top answers, or why they've changed, if and why they've changed their behaviors. The top answers were a result of relationships with their community or wanting to deepen those relationships, perceived health benefits for supporting local food, and broadly just sustainability. Side note, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with the word sustainability in my sustainability director role, because I think that is a buzzword and it can be divisive. So depending on who I'm talking to, I try to qualify what sustainability is, because it's easy to look at one of the many components of sustainability and not the whole picture. And then asking of these people in the Gallatin Valley, why do you think it's important for your community to have access to local food? And those big answers were support of and investment in the local economy, enhancing the sense of place and community, and also more, again, on the quality of food, whether it's flavor, the physical, emotional well-being, and health as well. And then one other question that we asked, what one thing do you think would help your community choose to purchase more locally produced foods? Big answers were more labeling of food and better placement in grocery stores so that it's easier to see and understand where that food's coming from. better access and pricing broadly, more awareness and education about where that food's coming from, how it's produced, and then generally increased engagement and interactions with local food and farmers. So a lot of that came down to stories of the farmers themselves and what are they doing? Who are you? Why should I buy? Why should I support you? So that's that. So it's a lot. I used a lot of time, but I think we have time.
We do. My name is Susan Joy. I'm the program manager for Made in Montana, which lives at the Department of Commerce within the Office of Tourism and Business Development, and within that, the Industry Services and Outreach. So I'm proud to say I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Actually, the way I look at my role is I work for the Montanans. I work for the taxpayers. My salary is supported by the bed tax. So anyone that stayed in a hotel last night or tonight, look on your bill. You'll see the accommodations tax. That goes to the Department of Commerce and is split up into many slices of the pie. But part of my role is to promote Montana as a wonderful place to visit, and not just the parks, not just the big 5 cities, but also all of Montana. So everything from the Evelyn Cameron Gallery in Terry to the Kootenai Dam over in Libby and all points in between. So the program I'm here to talk about today is a newer program called Taste Our Place. Have you heard of it? Then Taste Our Place? You have? This morning. Okay. So, okay, that's all I have to say. That's important. Made in Montana started out in the late 80s, early 90s. It's written in the state statute, and the idea is that you live in Montana, you make something here in Montana, you add value to that raw ingredient, and then we sign you up in our database, and you have a sticker that says, my product is made in Montana. We partner with the Department of Agriculture for the Grown in Montana labeling. And then most recently, we have the Native American Made in Montana, which is open to one of a tribal member in one of the 8 recognized Montana tribes. So we do have a lot of people that say, well, I'm Cherokee, but I live in Montana. But the intent of the program is for Montana tribal members. And most recently, in the last 18 months, we've been promoting Taste Our Place, which is in partnership with the Department of Agriculture, and we work on identifying breweries, wineries, cideries, restaurants, bed and breakfasts, food trucks, catering businesses, any eating establishment that uses Montana ingredients on their menu. And we've signed up so far over 100 members for this program. We have that database on our website, madeinmontanausa.com. We're working with our tourism partners on the other side of the hallway who run the website visitmt.com, which is in marketing, you have that big funnel, right? So you have the top of the funnel and you engage them, you inspire them, come to Montana, look at this beautiful stuff. They book their trip, they come here, right? They land in Bozeman. So that funnel is working to inspire people, to make them commit to the trip to get here. We use a lot of fun Big Brother tools to make sure that people in Indiana get here and they spend money here. The number 2 top expenditure by non-resident visitors in the state of Montana is food. Number 1 is gas. That's a no-brainer. 88% of visitors to Montana actually drive here. They don't fly. So we know 88% of people come to Montana in a car or a bus or a camper van. And then they spend money on food. They don't spend money on lodging until number 3. So we know number 2, they've got to eat. We also know that 25% of the travel in Montana, 25% of the bed tax collection is us, because you all know that you can't drive to a meeting in Sydney from here and get back. It just doesn't work. I did it for 6 months, and you know, you can go 90, not in the state vehicle, and make it to Sydney and back in one day. So we know that we have to get visitors here. And what do we want to share with visitors? We want to share with them our beautiful scenery, our wonderful food, and the great experiences that we're going to have in this state. We have our brand pillars with Visit MT, with our state marketing plan. We've got, you know, this charming small towns, wonderful hospitality, breathtaking experiences that they can't get anywhere else in the lower 48. So Taste Our Place, We're trying to capitalize on that number 2 expenditure, food, and those visitors that are coming here, we're trying to get them to recognize a logo, Made in Montana, Taste Our Place, and when they see that at a restaurant, they'll know, oh, they're serving local ingredients here. But is it working? Are we doing what we set out to do? And yes and no, because with many of you in the room, you've probably tried a program, tried a project, dreamt up an initiative, had a board that was excited about a project. So you dream it up, you think you have the data, you go forward, and you realize, we didn't think about this. We didn't, wait a minute, tomatoes in Montana in January, how does that work? Or that most of the beef grown in Montana, most of the cows, they are not slaughtered here. They do not end up on plates here. They go to Iowa, they go to Nebraska, because that's how the food system is set up for a beef producer. It's economical, right? You start them here, put them on a train or a truck, and they go elsewhere. So there are a lot of things that in the last 6 months I have learned. So I started in February, this program was already underway, and my job is to implement it. So we've traveled around the state quite extensively. We've worked in the 7 tourism regions within the state. We've worked with tourism partners, visitor centers, convention and visitor bureaus, the people who market the state. We've gone out in the field with the Department of Agriculture and our Grown in Montana members, and we've said, you're a Black Angus producer. Tell us about getting Black Angus on the menu at Big Sky. Tell us about getting your potatoes on the menu in Miles City. Tell us about your hydroponic lettuce operation in Havre. How does that work? How are you connecting your food with restaurants and communities, and how can we promote that? And what we hear time and time again is, it's really difficult. It takes a lot of work, and the producers are already working their asses off to just make a living, right? The margin in farming and ranching is so tiny, and then you layer it on weather, tariffs, you layer on all these other pieces, and it feels like there's a breaking point. So we're trying to do what we can to, promote local, promote the realities, and also just be aware of the challenges that farmers and ranchers are facing in the state as they try to get their products. And then in also talking to restaurants and bars and even grocery stores, we were in Missoula this past week, it's a big challenge. Both, can a producer supply 600 pounds of hamburger a week to one restaurant, let alone 600 pounds of hamburger a week to one restaurant 365 days of the year, when cows are born at one time of the year, they're finished at another time of the year, and there are only 3 or 4 USDA certified slaughterhouses in the state. So how do all these pieces work together? So I would say that, yeah, it's working. We've got a logo and it's in restaurants and we've signed people up, but there are so many things that we did not know about. And I love what you just said about being curious. We have to be curious and ask these questions and find out, is it working? What are the challenges? And how can we be good partners? Not just, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, but what can we do? Is there something that I can do within state government that can open up a pathway so that we can have another state inspector in a certain location that'll facilitate the slaughtering of cows? And can we make it so that a kombucha producer in Red Lodge can get their product to market in Billings? And so a lot of our partners are going to be like the Western Growers or food hubs like the Yellowstone Food Hub and like Northern Plains and AERO. We need all these partners because the thing is, we're all doing great work, but we can't be in silos, whether it's the Department of Ag or the Department of Commerce, but also as nonprofit entities doing this work. We can't just be in silos thinking we're the ones who can do it best, because that's not true. It's a huge state, and I couldn't do the work that I do without knowing people and being connected to people and being curious, just asking, what are you doing at the Department of Commerce in that building? What I tell my kids I do every day, as a side note, is I just answer the phone and do emails. but I also try to do other stuff too. So, again, I'm Susan with Made in Montana. I do have some swag, and I'm happy to be as candid or not candid during the Q&A section. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Zach Brown. I live here in Bozeman. From Bozeman originally, went to school at the University of Montana. Neva was one of my professors, as environmental studies student, and did 1 year on the East Coast after college, and then came home. And since I've been serving in the legislature and working at a nonprofit in town called One Montana. So I guess my two hats on this topic that I wear, the first is the political hat. And I guess I share this factoid not to pat myself on the back, but more as an admission or something, or what do you say when you're in the Catholic confession? A confession, that was the word I was looking for. As I said last night, I'm a Democrat from Bozeman, but I've been endorsed in 2 campaigns by the Farm Bureau, and recently won an award from the Farm Bureau. And so, take that for what it's worth. Don't shoot at me, I guess. But I've thought a lot about in that space how. And by the way, an urban Democrat, would be an unlikely ally for agriculture in general, or maybe particularly conventional agriculture. But I've thought a lot about the ag system with my politics from the standpoint of all the pressures on that system in regards to people. It's an incredibly quickly aging workforce. The pressures and the challenges for a young person who wants to get into that field, either as a worker or ultimately as a self-employed farmer or rancher, are tremendous, as everybody in this room knows. And so I've tried to promote ideas and projects and policies that hopefully get all those ag groups who don't always get along or see eye to eye on issues on the same page and say, yes, we can all agree on the fact that we need more young people back on the farm or ranch. We need, maybe a big conventional farm or ranch needs help with succession planning so that they aren't forced to sell or divest in their operation. And likewise, some of my classmates from U of M who were thinking about how do I start a small vegetable farm or ranch. There's lots of barriers to getting into that space as well, which of course is a different type of agriculture. But at the end of the day, our ag industry used to employ, I won't make up a percentage, but a really significant percentage of our workforce, and today farmers and ranchers make up about 2% of our population. And so the number of people participating is shrinking, and that's certainly the case here in Montana. And we need to think about how we get more young people back. Just one tiny little sliver of that pie, not the silver bullet by any means, but something I've spent a lot of time working on in the last couple of years is a student debt assistance program for young people out of the Department of, and we finally passed it into law this last session. So it allocates funds from the Growth Through Agriculture program to give student loan assistance grants back basically to qualifying young farmers and ranchers who either are going back to the family farm or ranch or are trying to get started. But one of their many obstacles is figuring out how to pay off their student loans in a timely way. So that's just that part of my life, I guess. The other part of my life is working for One Montana, and actually yesterday was my last day after almost 6 years there, so that's my caveat there. But One Montana has been many things over the years, but we came up with the name One Montana in 2010, I believe. And the mission is to bridge the rural-urban divide on a myriad of issues, and we think a lot about the challenges facing rural communities in Montana. And of course, as everybody can imagine, the lifeblood of rural communities, economically, culturally, and everything else is agriculture. And so we think a lot about our food system from that standpoint, from the standpoint of vibrant rural towns and rural communities. And a couple of things I've worked on since I've been there, we published a feasibility study thinking about meat processing a few years ago. So we worked with the Department of Commerce, the federal Commerce Department and private industry, the Stock Growers Association, et cetera, to think about what would a potential business model for some sort of a meat processing facility look like in Montana. We thought a lot about that. Candidly, what we came up with, and I wasn't directly involved with it, didn't end up gaining traction. It was one of those many, kind of failed proposals that is somewhere in the waiting line at the moment. But it informed a lot of people, got a lot of people thinking about our food system. And today I've had some initial conversations, not directly involved, but a lot of people that I've worked with and know have started the process of scoping out. They have all the capital raised that they need if they can go through the permitting process successfully, acquire land, et cetera, to build about 100 head a day facility in Yellowstone County. The name of the company, I think, should be intriguing to everybody who's affiliated with AERO. They're called Restoration Beef Company. So they're thinking about how do we support value-added meat, kind of premium meat that supports this idea of restoration, both environmental restoration as well as community restoration. So that's an exciting step forward. And related to that, my other half, my fiance Alice, actually would be better on this panel than me in a lot of ways. She used to manage a grass-fed beef company called Yellowstone Grass-Fed Beef. And so as she was working her tail off trying to make this company somewhat financially sustainable, I got to hear a lot of her reflections and meet the people she was working with and spend time on the ranches that they were selling their product and go to brandings and that sort of thing. And just some reflections from my point of view, watching her struggle with that work for a couple of years. First of all, again, one of their biggest pressure points on that business model is truthfully the food processing infrastructure. So that company has a grass-fed product that is really a premium product, yet they send gooseneck trailers to Columbus to process their cattle 15 head at a time. So if you think about the economics of driving from the Centennial Valley or Twin Bridges or Harlowton, which is where their 3 properties are where they buy cattle from, 15 head at a time to deliver your product, and that was really stretching the boundaries of what Columbus could handle. And Columbus is a great facility. I think they were really partners in small business, but just the economics of what it actually cost and the economies of scale that could not be achieved with a facility that size. And by the way, Yellowstone Grass-Fed Beef is their largest customer by a long shot at this place. That put a huge pressure point on the whole economics of the business. They end up, because they have to pay such a premium for processing, because the cost of the ranch to deliver the product to a facility at such a regular interval, at such small scales, was so challenging that they end up with a product that is probably twice the cost of a conventional product. And so what does that mean? That means that they have to get people with expendable income who can afford to go to the grocery store and pay $8 a pound for ground beef. And that limits your market right away, right? And so she also, a couple other reflections, she spent a lot of time doing market research, talking to consumers, thinking about how to position their product. And for whatever it's worth, they really found that, the connecting ethos of the landowners and the owners of the company were very much founded on environmental principles, that they were thinking about ecology and wildlife interactions and restoring the prairie, and very ecocentric was a lot of their philosophy. But they found out that that wasn't a real motivator for their consumers. The most compelling message for their consumers was really about health. And one of their biggest target audiences was that they ended up kind of finding, or really thinking was where they would make the most gains, was mothers thinking about feeding their kids. And so I guess it's worth saying that there's some real challenges, or repeating that there's some real challenges with a premium local product that has all these other benefits, but at the end of the day you're asking consumers to have quite a bit of expendable income and live at a place in life where they are willing to make, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, make some decisions that are pretty sophisticated because they don't have to worry about basic economic security, frankly. And so that limits what your audience is right away. And I think we should all be grappling with that business model and also how we reach people that don't live in economic security. How can we deliver them healthy premium products? And right now the system isn't set up to do both of those things. I had one more reflection on the Yellowstone grass-fed beef thing. But I think I forgot it. So I'll just leave it there for now, but happy to riff about any of those things, or I look forward to the discussion.
All right, my name is Brooke Bohannon, and I'm from Whitefish, Montana. I'm originally from Vermont, so I'm not from Montana. Been here for 15 years. My husband and I moved out here. But going back, I have education in ecology, environmental tech. I grew up in a very rural Vermont town. All my favorite places to go are our friends' dairies. I remember one day, I'm sure my father does not remember this conversation, we were just in the truck driving, and I was like, Dad, one day I want to be a farmer. And in that time, that was like in the 80s, the dairy industry in Vermont was collapsing. It was, there's like 2 dairies left in my town, when there used to be tons of them. And so he was like, yeah, I don't think you should go into agriculture. You should go to college and do something different. But I always hung on to that, but it took time because, my father said, don't go into agriculture. I was like, all right, Dad. So we moved to Montana for various reasons. I ended up working for Montana State University in Creston. There's an agricultural research center. So I worked up there for 7 years in cereal grains and canola doing research, because obviously it's a land-grant university. And so that gave me a great appreciation for commodity agriculture. I had no exposure. I could not identify wheat from barley prior to that. I have the utmost respect for our farmers who are in conventional ag. And then I slowly departed from the university and started my husband and I started our little 1-acre diversified vegetable farm called Wicked Good Farm, because actually I would love to be a grain farmer. But as you guys have pointed out, that access to that is very difficult. Like, how do I, especially in the flathead, right? I mean, land is very expensive there. Most of the farmers that are in grain production, they rent their ground, which I think is common around the state. So we actually don't own the land we farm, even on a 1-acre basis. We rent that ground. And when I was leaving the university, I was talking to some other vegetable farmers, friends of ours, of like, all right, I'm gonna do it. And they were like, just so you know, don't be delusioned that you can leave a pretty secure job working for the university and make a living being a vegetable producer on 1 acre at farmers markets. Like, just so you know, like you're not going to make it. There's a fixed amount of people who come. There's only so much money to be spent at those farmers markets, and you're just going to be another piece of that pie. So they're choosing where to spend their monies, right? So like, okay, well that's encouraging. And so, but you said, if I could do it again, I would stay small, but what I would do is try to network with all the other local farms in the valley and start a distribution business. And so we're in like about year 3 of that. We have Wicked Good Produce and Farm, and the produce piece is basically, it's kind of like the growers co-op, I guess, but different, much smaller. Our goal is to just stay within the Flathead Valley. We do crop planning with the farmers. We work with the restaurants. We try to help do menu planning, do a lot of education on the seasonality of things. Like, okay, if you want peas on your menu, maybe it should just be this window of time, or just seasonal veg. So, there's a lot of education that we do there. But anyways, it's being very successful, we think. So we work with about 8 farms right now. Some of them are small, some of them are big. I mean, our largest farm is only like 20 acres for vegetable farms. And we distribute to between 30 and 35 different entities throughout like the peak season. Throughout the winter, it's much smaller. And then in 2017, somebody came to our house, a neighbor. Actually, Scott Brandt, who works for, I think he's a volunteer for, Fast Blackfeet. And he brings a lot of food from the Flathead Valley over to the Blackfoot Nation. so he was like, hey, there's going to be this grant from AERO, and I think you should like be part of it. And I was like, well, okay. So that was the grant that AERO got, a Western Stair grant for the Montana Food Economy Initiative, and they broke the state up into 5 regions. I'm looking for Jen, right? I should know these facts. 6 regions. And so so I became the field advisor for the North Flathead region, and it's a producer-led grant because it's a SARE grant. So we had to pull together a handful of primary producers. So in my world, it's vegetables, so it's a little bit heavy on the vegetable side of producers. And then we also brought in local food advocates. We have a woman who works with food access through double SNAP dollars and backpack programs. And then Robin Kelson from the Good Seed Company, where she's all about seed sovereignty. So it was a really nice group of people. We spent like 2 years talking. First of all, we had to teach ourselves, like, what is a food system? You hear about it, but we were like, what is this thing? What is the concept of food system? So we had to learn that ourselves. We had meetings, we went through rubrics. We developed surveys to ask our community different questions about food systems, their part in the food systems, how they access it, where they access it, what do they access, why don't they access, and we tried to get all that data back together. And I'm proud to say this summer, so in the spring, we kind of like, okay, the MFEI grant is going to terminate and our group wants to stay together, what are our outcomes, where we want to go. So we now call ourselves Glacier Feast, and Feast stands for Farmers and Eaters Advocating Sustainability Together. And I'm just going to read our mission statements. That's as far as our little group has come. Our mission is to support the expansion of Flathead Valley's food-growing economy into a thriving community-based system that is value-based and enhances the community's economic, nutritional, social, and environmental health. So through that, our goal is, and we have a little slogan that if you eat, you're in, because we can't have a thriving food system if the consumers aren't part of it. You know, we have access points of, $8 a pound ground beef isn't accessible to everyone. So how do we get everybody in the room and try to foster they have to be wanting it, the farmers have to be able to produce it, and they have to have the systems in place, like the processing and the marketing and all that together to have our food system thrive and address all of those. And it is sad when the consumer doesn't value the environment. I mean, I face that all the time too, but how do you put value to that? So anyways, we don't have the answers. But anyway, so our goal as a group is to bring people in, sort of as a think tank, to be able to add value to our whole community and our food system. And we have looked at, I thank the state for doing the Montana Made in Montana and local and the Taste Your Place. I think those are all really great campaigns, and the support that you give to farmers, and hopefully partnering together to continue to elevate those programs.
One of the questions that I want to start off with is just the concept of the terminology of local, because some of the things that AERO interacts with our producers and consumers who are like, I want access to healthy food, I want to access food that's close to where I live, I want to support the producers in my region. But we're curious if what your thoughts are on using the slogan "Buy Local" as an example. Using the term "Buy Local," is that an effective message that conveys all of the nuance that those folks are looking for? And is the term local, is the word local limiting? Especially when we live in a state where we've talked about the diversity, or the diversity within Montana, but also the geography within Montana can sometimes make the term local dependent on where you live. If you're in the Highline region, local might be, a radius of 200 miles, for example. We do absolutely have food deserts in this state. So anyway, I'd be curious to your thoughts on specifically the language of buy local, and if you have thoughts on is that effective, and also do you have alternative slogans that we could use that might have a different, might bring a different narrative to the conversation.
I'd just take an initial stab and say that a different way to look at that outside of the food system, but my family owned a business downtown for many years, and for those of you who are just coming to Bozeman or haven't been here that long, you might look at downtown and say, well, Bozeman's got it made, it's all been fine forever, there's a lot of wealth here, whatever, but my parents were involved in the Downtown Business Association back in the 90s when it was really scrappy and very uncertain about whether we were going to be able to keep a thriving downtown. The Gallatin Valley Mall had just come in, and there was a lot of money flowing that way and a lot of development pressure. This was before North 19th existed, and so they had a lot of success for whatever it's worth, focusing economically on the system around downtown and the businesses and the infrastructure and the facades on buildings and through TIF districts and other types of things like that, but also really trying to instill community pride in consumers to say there is something valuable in buying downtown, in buying local and supporting local businesses and not going to the businesses at the mall or the businesses on North 19th, but supporting something that is a little more community centered. And I think the results speak for themselves here. So that's one thing to say. Then a limitation on buy local for whatever it's worth on the production side. Another thing that Yellowstone grass-fed beef struggled with is they really wanted to just focus their consumer market locally. So they put a lot of effort towards just getting as many consumers within sort of the greater Yellowstone area as they could, and particularly Bozeman and Missoula. They moved their biggest customers, Dining Services. But if you pick on Dining Services, that contract was a loser for them. They lost money as a business on that contract. They moved a lot of product. It was a great exposure tool. They were really excited to support the mission of what Dining Services was doing, but as a business, it was a drain. They were losing money every year. And if you think about the limitations of just focusing on a local consumer market with a premium product like that, there may not be enough human beings or enough warm bodies in a place like this who have enough expendable income to buy that type of product. And so they put some limitations on their own business model that they were really grappling with when my fiance was their general manager. And I think ultimately probably have started to decide that they have to find some other consumer markets where people have more money, frankly, like San Francisco or New York or Chicago, where they can build some partnerships out. And that's kind of Liz Carlisle's thing with Lentil Underground too, right, is finding those types of opportunities. But the other side of that is then you have the carbon emissions associated with packaging and sending your product across the country. And that's something that the ownership of this company was grappling with, struggling with. Do we want to make money as a company or totally stick to our values? And those are tough decisions. So.
Yeah, I'm Ann Little, and I run a couple of commercial kitchens in Missoula, and I'm dealing with people who are processing local food all the time. And I just have a couple of things I want to say. First of all, organic trumps local. People are looking more for the health benefits of organic when they're looking at the grocery shelf than they are. So in that case, local kind of slides to second place, so that people have the money like you were talking about. Another thing that we have to deal with is that the price that the farmer gets for his food does not reflect the cost of producing it in any way, shape, or form. And almost every farmer I know has off-farm income. And that's a food subsidy that is never acknowledged. You know, somebody's a nurse or does landscaping in the winter or, you know, whatever. So that's something to think about. The other thing is about food, the margins are so slim that my people who are producing stuff, manufacturing nut butters or salsa or whatever, they can't afford to buy it. You know, they have to be able to produce their product in January. They're going to buy from California or Mexico or New Zealand, and the carbon footprint is horrendous. But that's a reality of what they have to do to be able to provide a really premium product. And again, it's out of the reach of a lot of people because they're shopping by price. And for a lot of folks, that's bottom line. One of the things we can do is the out-of-state promotion. And if you can team up with QFD or somebody else who is shipping out of state, that makes a huge difference because you can always sell the cachet of Montana. Montana is fresh, natural, clean. People love that. And I think that's something that the Ag Department, does push, but could really push even more. And the other problem you have is like, we're talking to the crowd, the choir here. 80% of Americans do not care about organic. They look and they know the brand name is part of the American dream to have a brand name in your food cabinet. And that's Nabisco, that's Cheerios, that's General Mills, it's all the big brand names, and that's what we're up against. So education is a huge part of this, to let people know day after day after day that the local product, the organic product, the Montana product is really the best product for them. Because when they think of a health thing, they don't think about local, they think about organic. And that's really something that we need to do more about.
What role does marketing play now in the consolidation of our food system, and what role can it play in addressing some of that consolidation so that our farmers are paid well and consumers have access and some of that centralization breaks up?
So I suppose when we're talking about marketing, who is our audience? Is our audience the consumer? Is our audience a corporation? Is our audience a visitor? Is our audience a buyer? So at the state, when we look at our Taste Our Place program, we're constantly thinking about our messaging. Is our goal to get a visitor to spend more on a local product? Because we all know when we're on vacation, we're more willing to spend a premium dollar for a premium product. Perhaps when we're at home, we're more likely to reach for the white box with the black letters. So from my perspective, for the work that I do, I always think about who am I targeting? And the conversations that I've had with producers and the conversations I've had with eating establishments have been along those lines. The producer's saying, I can't afford to get organic certified, but my local product is just as good. I'm using organic practices, I just don't have the sticker because I just don't have that kind of time or money. And the restaurant is saying, local for me might be Wyoming, or local could be North Dakota. So, we're talking to them about that. And what the restaurant is also saying is, I want to support my local farmer, my local rancher, but I can't charge a premium price in Livingston in January because the locals are buying my hamburger. So I have to be very aware of marketing local so that it's also affordable. That would be my only comment on marketing. But I turn it over to someone else on the panel.
One of the things that Glacier Feast's going forward in 2020's goal is to come up with an education/marketing campaign to address a lot of those issues. We don't have the answers, but that's definitely where we're going to put our time and energy, is educating the consumer, or just our community, may it be on the cost, looking, like the presentation this morning, how do you put a cost on that? If you really tell people, for 3/4 million people are eradicated from this country so that our country could have the wealth that it has today. You're like, oh, geez, Okay. So anyway, I don't have the answer for the marketing piece, but I think that the education needs to come forward, and it has to be from all sectors of the food system.
I also have zero experience in marketing, but I would echo what you said, Brooke, about education, because I think that we live in such an attention-based economy. If we take that traditional, from my very naive perspective, if we take that traditional marketing route where we're just pounding people with slogans which eventually become buzzwords and eventually have no value, and then we have to come up with another slogan. In this, kind of some of these qualitative answers we got from the open and local survey was one person had said that the organic label has hurt local growers, and that kind of goes to what you're speaking about, and that I think organic has the power it does because it has very explicit requirements for a stamp of approval, and local doesn't really have that because it's so unique to a place. And I think we need to describe local individually as a business or an organization or as a state or as a food shed, because in Bozeman here, some farmers that we work with in Wyoming are much more local than other farmers that are in our political boundaries and outside of our food shed. From the restaurant perspective, most people don't come to Montana Ale Works because we serve local food or realize that we have 30% of our cost of goods goes to Montana producers, whether it's, and most, you would think that a lot of that money goes to brewers and distillers, but it's actually a majority of food products. So I think, my role I kind of talk about with people is as a double agent is trying to educate our staff as my agents that go out and tell our guests about the food that they are consuming in really casual ways, because you don't go out to get a lecture. You don't decide to have a good time and then get pounded with how we got here with our food system, or let alone just that, did you know the burger that you're eating, it never left the state of Montana, which is actually a beautiful thing. And so finding really positive and exciting and creative ways to educate people really slowly by word of mouth, but saying, hey, so I really I'm trying to change the values of our staff so that they can change the values of our guests, so that they realize that so much food is produced in Montana. All of our burger, 100% of our burger, 100% of the time, never leaves Montana. And so, like I said, people don't usually come to our restaurant because of local food, but we can tell them, by the way, you came out to have a good time, but you're also participating in a social good. And I think people grab onto that, the story of that. Another, a gal who farms in Churchill area in this survey, she said, my cows aren't anonymous and my customers aren't anonymous. These animals become you, why wouldn't you want to know them? And so I think that speaks to the story and the education part of it, and that's where the marketing, I think, needs to go.
And just to say, Ale Works, at one point, maybe it still is, was the busiest restaurant in Montana. So 30% of your product line being from Montana is not insignificant. I want to throw out an anecdote to say that there are also creative ways I think that businesses and producers can kind of market their product or package it in ways that make it somewhat price competitive with other things. And an example was, again, my fiance spent a ton of time thinking about their beef jerky product. And a couple background things about beef jerky. Most consumers have no brand loyalty to beef jerky. You just go in the gas station, you pick out the one that looks good or the one that meets your price point, and then you go. And you don't have a Jack Link's consumer versus a whatever. So entering in as a niche, small business, grass-fed product into that space and thinking about it on the shelf at Town Pump is kind of tricky. And if they met all of the packaging design, if they were just trying to duplicate the product that they were competing with, they wouldn't have a chance because their price point would be twice the price point of their competitors. But what if, does somebody need 10 ounces of meat? What if you can get the same price point roughly by just giving the consumer less product? And most Americans eat too much protein anyway. And so what if you're giving a beef jerky package that is almost the same price as Jack Link's, just has a little bit less product, and your business model can balance out a little bit and you can reach the consumer in a more equitable way, maybe, right? That's just a hypothesis.
Okay. Hi, so I have a question that touches on a couple points that have been brought up about that connection between local and health. And I know there's another session that's about this specifically, but I'd love to hear opinions from folks in this room about that, and to hear from the panelists about how you've navigated conversations you've had with your customers or with your stakeholders about local and its connections with health. Becca, like you said, there's no one meaning for what local means, so it's difficult. There are connections we can make to why local food would be healthier than, like large national alternatives, but it's hard to be able to say that as a rule, that local equals health. Although, like kind of touching on the point that Anne made, like I can understand how consumers have this idea that, oh, okay, I'm more health focused, so I'd rather go with organic. And with local, in my mind, it's much more of a holistic and long-term picture of how we build a healthier community. If we think about like kids and families and them changing their taste preferences, right? And like learning to eat new vegetables and fruits that they've never cooked with before. And that's where that education piece is so vital, and that story piece, because I find that what local has that a lot of other foods don't have is that connection to your community, and just being able to build those positive associations with a healthy piece of produce because you know who grew it, its relevance to your community. Just in the long term, it's just so obvious that local equals health, and there's a connection there. But when it comes to just that present moment, having that conversation and being able to say, yup, like there's a clear line, that's a bit tricky to navigate. So like, how have you guys, dealt with conversations about that, if it's come up?
I haven't had that many conversations actually about local. I mean, as a producer, earlier everyone did sort of mention how busy farmers are, and I feel like I'm just decompressing from our farm season. But I don't have that many conversations about local food being healthier, and I don't know if it's our customer base, if they're just affluent enough to believe that. So I guess that's what I have to say, is that as a vegetable grower, and we do CSAs, farmers markets, and then the wholesale distribution, we don't really have a lot of those conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I would wonder, like, did you say in comparison to organic or in comparison just healthier in general? Because I think that could be questionable for a lot of different people. Whether, like, I think that there is the factor of like the transportation time, absolutely, from organic from California, but it's questionable for a lot of people whether they can actually come to the conclusion that it's healthier, I think.
I guess I have those conversations with like friends, but as far as like consumers, like there's not time. I hate to say that, but at farmers market, it's just like, it's insane. We don't have a lot of customers that seek us out afterwards. Sometimes at our CSA pickups, we might have people, we kind of dive into a little bit of like organics, non-organics, health benefits, environmental benefits, but I would not say it dominates the conversations.
I think this is a great conversation. It's also frustrating because it's really hard for us to stay on topic because this is such a complicated situation we have in this state. And I think just Jen's initial questions, and I think if we can possibly, later on today, we're going to think about this next decade. We're going to think about this state and where we've been. And this particular piece of this marketing, has it been helpful? This word, local, in a state of Montana when it's our 4th biggest in the country and it's 44th in population, local is something that is not local in Vermont.
Right.
I mean, your communities in Vermont, you can say local and someone is going to know geographically, yeah, I'm getting my milk from there, my dairy from there, and my vegetables from there. So I just challenge us all in these next few minutes to think about this marketing of this word and the fact that we think that this is the right words to use. I mean, even the co-op yesterday, we asked them what is local.
Right. Local
for the co-op in marketing, in their mind, is if you're a producer within 100 miles, that's local. But if you're getting, but I'm also going to get local food from the Western Montana Growers Co-op if my local producers can't provide that. So, I mean, I just think if we can just try to wrap our brain, should we be using this word in this state? And not that we want to abandon value-based, community-based food in this state, but is this really working effectively for a state like ours? And we go to other states to ask for like help, but they're small. I mean, Vermont is just a great example, one of the statewide food plan, just top of their game. They have the same number of people that we have in our state. In this little state that probably fits however many that you
121 Rhode Islands in Montana.
I think it's 14 Vermonts in Montana.
I'll shut up, but let's just, should we be using this word? And, or is there
And if
another
not,
word?
is there some other,
Exactly.
as consumers, you can help out. Like, if the idea is to convey a values-based system
Exactly.
and all of the things that we're talking about here, what are the things you would look for in the store? And maybe local works for everybody in this room, but like, think about other folks in your family, you know, like what, I think to Janet's point, it's not an easy question to answer. I'm not asking anybody to be like, I know. But if you know, like, maybe it's a thing to just think about and like carry on a conversation with your friends and neighbors. And it is a question that AERO wants to help everyone address. And so we are looking for input from you, even if it's just, hey, I was at the store and thought about that. You know, we can keep this. Anyway.
I would say that local works to some degree. You know, there's both sides of that coin. It's not a perfect system. But to say, like, as a state to abandon it, local is like a nationwide movement, right? I mean, like, people are buying local. Support your local. But are there levels of what local means? You know, should there be definitions? Should there be education? And each region, because the state is so big, you know, if regions have like what local is, like the co-op yesterday told us like a producer is 100 miles away. So they've defined what local means for them. And I think that if within parts of the state or entities like the co-op or AERO can define what local means to them, I don't know how you convey the message, you know, whether it be on a menu. I mean, each place would be different.
And maybe we just figure out how to do that better.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like you were talking about your family supporting the downtown businesses back in the 90s to keep it vibrant. Like, that is also local. Like, it's about supporting your community. You know, like, we have our local hardware store, and then 10 miles away we have Home Depot and Lowe's, you know, so we choose to support them, our local hardware store, we can, knowing that the products that they're carrying are not made in Montana. You know, but it's still a local business. Then you can say, well, Home Depot also employs local individuals and provides work for them. So, I mean, in general, local is a very difficult thing. You know, like, you look at the kitchens, you know, people making value-add products. Someone's making a salsa. It's made in Montana, so it's local, but where are the ingredients sourced? So, like, that's where I struggle with local is, like, there's a huge gradient, but it still identifies something that is hopefully making our community stronger, redirecting those dollars back into our communities, and making it more viable.
I struggle with local coffee for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Exactly. I mean, that's a perfect point. Is like, we all know that local in that context does not mean our state or anywhere near it.
But that's where you would buy it.
Well, I kind of struggle with the distinction between selling locally to Montanans and then selling to tourists. And then also within Montana, there's Montanans from a different part of the state who's so vast going to another part for tourism. And just talking to some of the producers that are neighbors to where I live currently, some of them don't care about organics or they don't care about they want seafood. So I think a lot of Montanans don't really care about where their food comes from. They care more about the price point. And also, as a producer, if you're able to make more profit selling to non-Montanans, then you have more opportunity to hire Montanans and provide income. So I almost think that local is interesting because you make more money through tourism, and local doesn't really talk about tourism.
Susan, maybe you can speak to that a little bit in terms of marketing to out-of-state folks.
Sure. I think every state, but definitely Montana and where I work in the Office of Tourism and Business Development, really struggle with that, and our tourism regions really struggle with it. For example, Gardner there's no place for anyone who works to support tourism to live in Gardner. So how do we encourage people to come to Montana, enjoy this beautiful state, and take their money, take all that we can get. Sorry, I know you work on this at the state capitol too. Like, can we increase the bed tax to fix roads? Can we increase the bed tax? I mean, the bed tax just increased by 1% to help fund some history projects. What if the bed tax was 15%? Could we fix the roads? So your question, that's getting at the heart of what we struggle with. Should we rely on non-resident visitors to pay for everything we want? Should non-resident visitors pay for ambulance service in Park County? Should non-resident visitors pay for the bridges in Terry? Should non-resident visitors support rail service? So I do think, like, yeah, when tourists come here, we want them to open their wallet. We want them to pay for lodging, pay for a good meal at the Ale Works. We want them to rent bicycles, rent cars. We want them to do all of those things. But we also live here too, and we also travel on those roads, and we stay in those hotels. And yeah, we want tourists to come here, and some communities will say, and then we want them to leave. Like, definitely in the Gallatin area or in the Flathead area, open your wallet, spend your money, and then leave. But, you know, Montana's a funny state that way, and I've probably riffed for too long, but there's definitely a push-pull on visit, spend money, go home, but spend more money before you go home. And yeah, get them to buy local, get to buy that premium tenderloin at Sage Lodge, which none of us in the room will ever experience, right? But someone will. Someone will. Farmers markets, did you know that the number 9 expenditure for non-resident visitors is farmers markets? Just saying.
My response to what you just said is that that's a really cool tension to struggle with when you think about, yeah, there isn't a right answer to exporting your product or keeping your philosophy pure where you keep all your product in a geographical space, because like you said, there is a benefit to building a sustainable business that may rely on external markets, but then you can contribute more to your community by hiring people and adding value. And so it's something to look at and apply your values on a case-by-case basis. There's no universal way to deal with that, but it's a really admirable tension to struggle with, I think, as a farmer or business owner. Something.
And I just have one other comment from the tourism. I was in a sustainable agriculture meeting in Oregon, and someone from the Park Service was speaking, and he said, we don't want to talk about the parks being loved to death. Apathy is our greatest enemy. Not overuse, apathy. If nobody cares, that's the enemy, apathy.
So that's really a good note to end on, I think. So as we wrap up the last few minutes, I think the heart of our question is really, how do we get more people to care, right? And that's really how you want to address your marketing, and that's really the question we're getting at, is how do we get people to care and to understand that we're communicating the values of a community-based food system. And I think that, if anything, this exploration has just been good at all of us deciding what are, maybe thinking about the nuggets of what's the missing link in your particular community, or what's the missing conversation in your particular town. And if you come up with something that you'd like to work on with others, please do, as Lindsay mentioned earlier today, there's those 2 huge poster boards in Ballroom A. Please go put your ideas up there. The intention of the weekend is not to solve all of the problems in the food system, although we'd like to try to hit a few, but to get these questions, to keep these questions at the forefront of our work for the next 10 years, and to get all of you involved and connected with resources that we can potentially work out solutions together. So the other thing I wanted to mention is Brooke talked about the Montana Food Economy Initiative, a program that the Glacier Feast folks went through for almost 2.5 years. And if that process is exciting to you and you're interested in empowering your community going through a similar process, come talk to me, because I did say 6 regions. So AERO operates by dividing up Montana and the 6 tourism regions. It happens to be convenient most of the time. It's not necessarily appropriate all of the time, but it's how we do things. And the MFEI project for the last 3 years has been involved with 4 of them. And so we learned a lot of things together executing that model. Brooke and her team were very gracious and patient as we all learned together. And we'd like to implement what we've learned and how to do it better in new communities. So if what Brooke mentioned is enticing to you and you think you might have a couple other folks in your region that want to work on something similar, come find me. I'm here all weekend and I want to get you hooked up with some resources. So with that, if there's any other party questions, I'm going to let you go just a few minutes early so you can go check out, buy some raffle tickets, check out Harvest Market, and get ready for headed over to Rendezvous. That sound good? I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for being here.